Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we are arranging this session because this is very popular sessions. Waste management extremely important for sustainability. Even in Asia Pacific, many developing country like Malaysia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, many countries has that kind of problems and we have our solutions. Mr. Marshall actually he has a great team. They are trying to solving this problem and this is actually a massive problem and most important thing is that they have very good intentions because many developing countries they complain like under the projects and everything they actually lost their port, lost their land. But Mr. Marshall has different economic solution. Mr. Marshall has different economic strategy which will be very helpful for world like the developing countries people. And I believe with this kind of solutions, many cities already we are working with many city mayors for introducing these projects and project solutions. Will get the benefits and hopefully in the future we will arrange a big conference on this waste management and we will invite all of the politicians, especially city mayor in the developing countries waste management project under the city mayors. And beside that, we will invite different banks and the corporations. And especially, Mr. Marshall has very good teams. They are very professional, and hopefully, our audience will enjoy today's session. Especially, I am really impressed by the previous sessions, and I get a very, very good feedback. Even today, I get a call from the Harvard business schools. Harvard business schools actually collaborate with World Talent Economy Forums. They have lot of research paper on sustainabilities. They are regularly following this green technology sessions, waste management sessions. So hopefully the directors of executive directors of Harvard Business School, Professor Karen, she also joined in the session. She committed to me today. So, Mr. Marshall, how you want to share your session, and especially, I know you have a very good presentation. Uh, how you want to explain with our audience?
Well, thank you, Sharif, for inviting our team once again on the second of a series of programs to deal with the climate crisis as it currently exists. We have a team here that will discuss, as the title slide says, the moment of truth. We have arrived at the moment of truth. Joint ventures for the developing world. And we believe we all need, everyone on this planet needs to get serious on the climate crisis. And when I promoted this session, I got a lot of feedback and people wanted to know, well, what's the essence of the session? And I made a pun, a word kind of word game in which I said, it's where the rubber meets the road. Now that's obviously ironic because rubber is today is not from rubber trees, it's from fossil fuels. But where rubber meets the road literally means where reality is beginning to occur. And as we've always said to Sharif, we like to talk in theory, but we actually need to act and be practical. So our practicality is here today with our team. I will lead off with a few slides in our deck to explain what the issues are. I will then hand off to Don Carley, who is in our last session on mobilizing climate finance. And then we will go to the other players on the team as well. And so some of the other players I'll just introduce briefly, and then they'll introduce themselves as we hand off. So we have Don Carley, who is been giving us a lot of input into how to marry up climate finance together with practical solutions around the world. We currently have 7 joint ventures. All of them are currently in the Western Hemisphere, which 2 of them are actually in Spanish-speaking countries. And therefore, we have Juan Carlos Salcedo, our international manager, who is obviously fluent in Spanish, and he is in charge of our joint venture in Jalisco, Mexico, and also in Colombia, South America. We also have with us David Smith, who has joined our team, and he is a world expert on what we call public-private partnerships. Sorry about my speech impediment there for a second. And he will discuss that and his technopoly. In addition to that, we have Arno Neumann. Arno Neumann is going to be talking about joint ventures that he and our team are exploring in India together with Sharif, and he'll give some background on that. And then we'll probably close out with Mark Sabin, who will discuss what are we delivering in practicality? What are the solutions that we as an entity bring to the table? So here's the first slide. I'll lead off, which is the global climate solutions delivered locally. That's what the joint ventures are about. Sharif, can we just make that a little larger, or is that the best we can do right now? Oh, okay. Anyway, so he's going to see if we can do this, get this large. There we go. So you can see the entire slide. So basically, there are several issues here. Extracting atmospheric carbon is a big issue. And we see that people, when I promoted this, not only did I say where the rubber meets the road, but I also pointed out to many people, and they loved it. Not only was my pun spot on, but also we are spot on with what we are doing, because people are beginning to copy us. Major players are beginning to copy what we're doing. That is a validation that this is what needs to be done for the global climate crisis. And we welcome the competition. We want them to do it because there's so much out there. Not any one company or any one group can handle it all. So here's what we're delivering locally and through our joint ventures. We're extracting atmospheric carbon. We're creating new resources from waste, so that as the climate bond that is being issued by the EU, by the European Union's climate bond initiative, goes under these different taxonomies. And as I indicated in a previous few sessions, a taxonomy is a set of rules that are very stringent in the EU climate bond to keep us from greenwashing, or some people might say whitewashing, meaning that we say one thing and do another, that we actually do what we say. And so what we're doing is we're taking waste of all kinds. Most people look at organic waste. We look at both organic and inorganic waste. And we take those and treat them as a feedstock or as a supply chain of new resources, not something that's going to get buried in the ground and possibly pollute the groundwater or create emissions into the air and create greenhouse gas emissions, or simply destroy the soil. So, and then also ending up destroying human life. And one of the things that we also want to indicate is that not only are we extracting the atmospheric carbon and creating new resources, we're also achieving this under the United Nations goals, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And one of the things that our group is noted for and was recognized for by the Climate Bond Initiative is that most of the people who have received climate bonds they all have to meet at least one SDG, but 8 have met 2 so far, and 1 has met 4. There's another one that's applying like us that meets 11, but we meet 14 of the 17, and we're pushing on to meet more. In one of our previous sessions, we had Hina Shah, who is right now in Iceland on a mission, so she couldn't join us on this session, but we'll have her in future sessions to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals. And also Mark Sabin has spoken to those goals as well. And so of the 14, the 17 the Sustainable Development Goals, we meet 14. And of course, what we're doing is renewing resources, we're revitalizing economies in these developing nations, and we're moving forward. So what is the business? What are the problems? There's lots of organic and inorganic waste all around the world, both in developing and developed countries. There is a depletion of resources. We're seeing that constantly. Over the last 200 or 300 years of the modern era, we are getting a warming planet. Now, there are people out there that deny this, but our approach is that we go by the science. We don't go by people's opinions. And I actually, on a LinkedIn channel, I made the comment, if somebody made a comment that it's not real. Well, that's not true if you go by science and go by fact. And the issue is, if you believe 2 + 2 = 3, I guess you're entitled to your opinion, but that doesn't make it so. So we don't go that way. We go by the fact and by science. And we do know that we do have a warming planet. And that warming planet over time was created through big business and big oil and other entities, which were required to get us to where we are today in terms of wealth around the world. But over time, there's been a global wealth disparity. And developing nations and developing countries suffer from the effects of this environmental deregulation. And they suffer it acutely. Our goal is to work together with developing nations to redress that rebalance and rebalance that issue. So what are the answers? One of the answers is, and Mark Sabin will talk about this later, is our pyrolytic carbon capture and storage technology, which is different than what is known as BECCS, which is the approach that big oil, big ag, and big chemical are trying to promote as green. But if you do the science, the best approach and the best economic approach to redress both the global wealth disparity and the warming planet, is to use a pyrolytic carbon capture and storage along with other technologies. Out of that technology, we create what we call elemental and formulated chars. As the co-chair of Working Group 3 for the cost action in Europe on biochar, it was termed biochar because they looked at converting organic material into a soil amendment known as biochar. But we've discovered, and if you read the book by Albert Bates and Kathleen Draper called Burn, How to Cool the Earth Through Fire, and this was published in late 2019, and you can go online to Amazon and get a copy of it. And we recommend it highly. We have no financial interest in it, but it's a good piece of literature. It tells you about the 100,000 markets that are termed biochar. As the co-chair of Working Group 3, we discovered that there are many more markets than that. It's just that the other markets, if you tell them they're producing biochar, they'll look at you like you have two heads and they'll think you're nuts. But basically, the material that you convert from waste into what we call elemental char can be used as is in some cases. In some cases has to be formulated with other materials and in some indications, other waste products to be able to create a product that reduces environmental impacts. What we're doing in our projects together, and if we join together with us, we will take the waste and convert it into products. And we don't mean dresses, shoes, or spoons. We're talking about products that reduce environmental impacts. In other words, enhance soil, clean up water, and reduce GHG emissions in the air, and increase livestock health through a regenerative, and that is coupled with regenerative agriculture. So the answer is that, along with our ultra nano bubble generators, those help clean up water, but in and of themselves, they could be seen as expensive, but we make them into profit centers together with our joint venture partners, because by blending it with the elemental char and also with our antimicrobial, the EnviroProtect, which by the way is EPA registered. This is a product that can really move things along. So producing sufficient elemental char is the key to delivering a triple bottom line approach to our business approach as a joint venture. When we say triple bottom line, meaning that it's people first, planet next, and profits last. But we do make profits. The next slide shows the global waste challenge that our company, Advanced Resilient Technology, uses as raw resources. So from farms, there is waste, grain, you have rice hulls and all sorts of materials like that There's sludge from wastewater treatment plants, from sewage plants. There is recycling from landfills. There is forestry waste. For instance, in the western half of the United States and Canada, there were massive amounts of fires recently because of the undergrowth of forestry material that landed on the floor and just it was lit up by either electrical arcs from the utilities or simply lightning strikes. Arno Neumann, who is joining us on this session, is out in British Columbia, so he knows firsthand what that means, and he also knows that there are droughts out in the West, such as California and Colorado and British Columbia. So all these issues can be addressed through our approach. And of course, there's miscellaneous material such as carbon, certain residues, and other plastics and textiles, which are known as PREF, and we can handle that as well. Next slide. So what are the outputs and the byproducts? So a lot of the outputs and the byproducts are from the elemental char. And by the way, elemental char can be used as a filtration media depending on what the feedstock is and how it's cooked or manufactured. There are lots of people doing lots of different types of pyrolytic carbon capture and storage technologies. Ours are, Mark will talk about those, how we get to those things. So we use biochar in construction, in farming, in cleaning up, like I said, wastewater, but also in air filtration. And it also can be used in health. Certain kinds of chars can be formulated to be nutritional supplements, nutritional hygiene products, and adsorbent medications. In fact, in the United States, and I'm not sure about this in other developing countries, but in many hospitals, if somebody has food poisoning and they go to the hospital, they drink a liquid that is essentially has biochar in it. And we'll talk about why that. I'll show why that is. People call it activated carbon. It's technically not. It is not, or they call it. They call it activated carbon. But let's go to the next slide. Ooh. Okay. So basically, that is the basis of what we're doing in our joint ventures. And I'm going to hand off to Don Carley to talk about the next, what got us to this part, and how and what is the transition from an environmental point of view.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thanks, Don.
So in our previous event, we talked a bit about the need to use blended finance as a way of mobilizing private capital. And that private capital, of course, is needed to address an existential threat that the world has agreed upon at the Glasgow COP26. And that is to limit global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. And the stark reality is that over the past 100 or more years of industrial development, primarily the developed nations have spewed over 1 billion tons of, I'm sorry, I should say that, a trillion tons of carbon into the atmosphere, which has led to this warming. And at this point, even if we were to reduce our use of fossil fuels to zero, if we were to eliminate all of the means of generating energy by means of fossil fuels, we would still not be able to keep global temperature under 1.5 degrees centigrade. In order to do that, we'll not only require a transition to renewable energy and decarbonization of industries, but it will require that we actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. In fact, not only will emissions need to be halved by 2030, emissions have to be net negative after 2050. And in order for us to reach what is called net zero before 2050. And biochar is one of the 6 carbon removal solutions that has been recognized by the IPCC, the body of the United Nations that's responsible for the science. And this is one of the areas which has not gotten as much attention as, for example, the other types of carbon removal that are being discussed. And we can move to, I think, the next slide to give you an overview of those. That would be the one that, there we go. Now, I don't know if it's possible to zoom in a bit, but I can't. I've got someone's text showing up in front of the screen, so I can't see it. There we go. So there are a number of approaches that can be used to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And not all of them have the same levels of readiness in terms of technological readiness. Not all of them are able to secure that carbon in a manner that is stable or durable over a period of, let's say, 100 years. And an example being one of the most common negative emission options or negative emission technologies is to plant trees or to reforest afforestation. And that those trees are very effective at removing carbon from the atmosphere. Biosynthesis is nature's way of doing that. However, trees can burn in a forest fire, as we've heard, or the plant matter can decompose and not only return CO2 to the atmosphere, but an even more powerful greenhouse gas, methane, to the atmosphere. There are other technologies that are being brought to the bear and get a lot of attention, one of them being direct air capture, which is an effort to use technological means to extract carbon from the atmosphere. At this point, there is one that is a plant that is actually in operation, but it's incredibly limited in its ability to remove high volumes. Remember, we're talking about not only the gigatons of carbon that are in the atmosphere, but the world is continuing to emit somewhere in the order of 50 gigatons per year as well, even in its ongoing methods. So we need carbon removal at scale, negative emissions technology at scale. We can try various ways of fertilizing the ocean or mineralizing CO2 in the ocean. Those are also being discussed. And of course, there is the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BECCS, which has gotten a lot of attention in the EU because at present it is considered a renewable energy to replace coal-fired power plants with wood-fired power plants, and then to try to couple with that carbon capture and storage technology that scrubs the hydrogen and from the syngas that's produced, to use that hydrogen as a carbon neutral source of fuel, and to take the CO2 and inject it into either deep geological formations or to mineralize it in the production of concrete. However, if we can go to the slide that shows the matrix, I think that's slide 9. Yeah, one more. To make it a little bit simpler, right there, the one that you passed through, this is there we go. To make it a little bit simpler to understand that that large number of net negative emission technologies that are available, when we try to rank them, they fall into 3 basic groups. There are nature-based solutions such as forestation, afforestation. There are technological approaches such as direct air capture and carbon capture and storage, which attempts to extract the carbon dioxide from the flue gases of a power plant or an industrial site and take it from fossil fuels and bury that into geological formations. But what ART and its solutions address is a hybrid approach that takes advantage of the capacity of biomass, whether that be trees or specifically grown energy crops like salix or switchgrass, to capture carbon, but to then, through pyrolysis, to convert that into stable biochar, which can be used as an agricultural soil amendment, where that carbon is locked in the soil for 100 years, and at the same time provides benefits in increasing agricultural productivity. Through this further development, it's possible to also take the syngas, which is a fraction of the pyrolysis process, and to then apply the same kind of carbon capture and storage process that we've talked about earlier for the stripping the carbon dioxide from the stream and leaving us with green hydrogen as an output. That's a later development as that carbon capture technology becomes more available. At present, the carbon capture and storage is primarily through biochar being put into the ground where it remains. And it's an established technology. Pyrolysis, unlike many of the other technological solutions, is an established, proven technology that is ready to be deployed at scale.
Thank you. Go back one, beyond that one, Sharif. We were out of order here. This one right here. Yes, it's good. That's it. So as you've heard from Don, we have looked at the various comparative alternatives for solving the climate crisis and addressing all the climate issues, such as greenhouse gas emissions, pollution of the water, pollution of our soils, impacts of what we would call zoonotic diseases, like the kind we're going through now, but specifically the one that hits livestock, such as the mad cow disease that caused Jacob Creutzfeldt's disease in humans. All these are related to the climate. This program today is really focused on how do we do that in the developing world. And we do that through public-private partnerships. And in our last session on mobilizing climate finance, David Smith spoke to that topic. But here David is going to bring to not only his key benefits, but also his expertise and background on working together with us to get developing countries to be able to do this in a fashion that is practical and doable now. So David, I hand it off to you.
Marshall, thank you so much. There's so much to do in this area that is so important to our globe that we just need to go in and begin to put in place the relationships needed to get it done. The slide on the screen talks about a lot of the key benefits of public-private partnerships, which are often referred to as P3s. That we can go there, and some of the way to look at some of them is some of the examples that we can do. Put the places together. For example, I noticed in the comments that one of the commenters is from Brazil, and in Brazil there's great examples that I have been involved with putting public-private partnerships together to put in place so much capabilities. I was involved with a public-private partnership between Petrobras, several universities. FGV was the lead university, some of the others, to look at a way to take Petrobras's petroleum company, Brazil, Petrobras's resources as they went from a government-owned company to a more private-centered company to make it more green. And Petrobras learned very early they could not do it by themselves. They had to take a broader concept of involving academia, of involving the government, involving many other companies together, and even involving some outside funding to begin to get it happen. And you see that happening in so many different places, because as you look around the globe, particularly in developing nations, there's so many opportunities there that the formation of these public-private partnerships are very important as you see what's happening. And if you look at the statistics I've seen recently on the green bonds, really a very small percentage of them have been issued to really tackle waste reduction and waste management. So it's one of the places where more work needs to be done, and it's being done in a way that, with the approaches that this panel is talking about, are done in a more managed, controlled way, which will be more effective in the long runs. The other really very interesting things to there is if you look in the low income and developing countries, uh, about 90% of the waste is just dumped or burned, which is in a way making them more effective of these challenges than we see many other places in the world today. And the type of problems we're dealing with that public-private partnerships can help address are just so important as you look at them. Um, a recent study I've seen out of WEF said that part of the challenges as you begin to form public-private partnerships in this area is that, you know, uh, the world generated well over 2 billion tons of waste in just the major cities last year. And almost 40% of that was unmanaged. And it was because there is not enough human capital, intellectual capital, money capital brought to get bear to do it. And as you begin to look at these benefits of P3s, where they promote innovation and creativity, where they promote infrastructure development and local development of jobs and other capabilities like that, which makes those communities more sustainable. They really increase the ability for technical and collaboration. And one of the questions just asked was about how's the impact for small businesses. That's through public-private partnerships is one of the places where small businesses, the whole concept can begin. There's a concept which I talk about called the Technopolis, and it's the different elements of the community, of the region that can be brought to bear. You often hear people aren't trained. Well, the education components of the Technopolis can help with that. The local regulations are not supportive, or the national regulations. That's part of the Technopolis. There's not enough funding of different levels. That's part of it. And you really have to bring all those elements together of the Technopolis when you form these public-private partnerships to be able to effectively put in place not just near-term solutions to problems like this, but longer-term sustainable solutions. And really well-designed, effective public-private partnerships are one of the keys to addressing grand challenges like the one we're talking about today. So, Marshall, I hope that kind of, at a high level, puts some of these elements in place.
Thank you so much. One more there. Okay, before I hand off to the next panelist, which is right there, Sharif, challenges for international joint ventures, which is a segue from what David brought to us. As David pointed out, there's big challenges, and David's background in private-public partnerships is going to be a critical role in what we're doing throughout the development world. We need to be practical. We need to act now. Time is of the essence. If you're living in Indonesia, you already know this. The Thwaites Glacier is melting. It's putting cities under the water. It's crazy. We're going to have lots of climate migrants in the next several years. So we need to act now. I noticed in one of the panels, somebody asked, I think it was PM Thomas said, what about CH4, which is methane? Well, all greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced or eliminated. And CH4, which is methane, is coming out of the Thwaites Glacier at exponential rate. It's unbelievable. And so, yes, we have the capability to deal with it. Our team does, and we know that others do as well. And we recommend that all players around the world act now. And so that is the concept that we need to talk about. To switch off, or not switch off, but to segue, there are challenges for international joint ventures. We have formed 7, 4 in the United States, 1 in Canada, 1 in Colombia, and 1 in Jalisco, Mexico. And the head of our international group that deals with South America and Spanish-speaking countries is Juan Carlos Salcedo. So Juan Carlos, I'll hand off the next round to you. You have to unmute.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marshall, and a pleasure to be participating in this panel. I'm going to be speaking directly as to the actual hands-on joint ventures, and there are some few important elements I want to bring up for discussion, specifically about international joint ventures. Starting with one is, theoretically, the combination of capabilities of the foreign partner and the domestic partner are always an attraction. So it makes a lot of sense to explore international joint ventures. But how we go about it, I think, from its inception and the flexibility that the international joint venture should have are key elements for their success. An international joint venture truly can be a frustrating experience and can ultimately have failure if it doesn't have the adequate planning and strategy, because many things change. There are many changes. The changes at the host nation, where laws normally change fast, where there is not much economic, political, and often social stability. Regulatory issues change, and also from the point of view of the normally the investing company that will have access to capital, but they also are under severe pressure for that capital to perform. So bridging these two very potent sides of the equation is very important, and joint ventures are a practical way of doing that. They are driven by mutual interest, and not only by those mandates that are developed theoretically in meetings in ivory towers. Intuitively, both sides, so the foreign and the domestic side of the joint venture, realize that this is an important tool. But once they are there, we all understand, okay, these are practices that come from this country along with certain guidelines, and we are in this other country. So everybody understands that there has to be accommodation. And what normally happens is that at the first conflict, everybody retreats back to what they know. In my case and experience, I had on a joint venture, I actively participated in China, for example. Caterpillar, who was a 50% partner of this company I work for, wanted to exercise its wisdom, years of experience, and forced to have a plan of action that really replicated the many years of success they had in the United States. But the Chinese fought it, but finally we all said, well, Caterpillar has the resources, has the experience. And what happened is we tried to apply that plan, and we were not successful at all. As a matter of fact, we were not able to sell our products that were produced in China under the Caterpillar operation. Although it was perfect for a different territory, it wasn't perfect for China. We had to redo the whole approach and include elements from the Chinese marketing strategy and Caterpillar's vision and way of doing a business. So this combination ultimately was the one that created a very successful joint venture. But if you look at it today, or you look at the moment of major success for Caterpillar and this company in China, was nothing like we thought we were planning in the beginning. So flexibility is very important. There is really a balancing act. The regulatory country, the country has regulations, and that are not only applied to foreign companies, but also to the local organizations. And that is trading of tax practices, labor practices, considerations about repatriation of funds, what happened with the funds that have to come back to the investors. And in the process, even with the best intentions, there is always a degree of disputes that arise because people are from different backgrounds, some people are from different cultures, and then all are doing something new. So it's very important to establish what kind of elements are important to resolve these disputes. What is the governing law? Traditionally, it was thought that the governing law should be the one of where the joint venture is established, but more and more the practice has shown that the governing law of an independent third neutral country is the best way to go about resolving issues. Things that you don't think right at the start, but they become always a challenge. We understand that this issue of climate change, environment is not something that can be resolved by a single country, not even by a single region. So I will say that these joint ventures are going to be becoming more and more popular in this industry because the needs are really global. The other experience, practical experience on joint ventures, is that um, once you get into the joint venture, you start understanding your partner better. Your partner starts recognizing your capabilities a little bit more, and then you start fostering the idea of creating new business, being more flexible, really taking advantage of the strengths of your partner and vice versa. So that becomes a very powerful, potent partnership over a period of time. And I will say that small and medium-sized businesses are the ones that benefit the most because they have the ability to combine resources that otherwise they would not have on their own. The host countries normally have the know-how how to deploy the business in the country where it is taking place, the joint venture is taking place, and the medium, small size foreign partner perhaps will never have that know-how capability to access the market. The one thing that I would like to stress that modifying the international joint ventures over their lifetime is crucial, is very, very important for its success. Many authors indicate that half of all successful joint ventures end up modifying their scope of activities by expanding into business that they didn't even think in the beginning they could entertain, but they realized in the process that those were really good opportunities. So joint ventures have to be able to be flexible, have to be able to adapt, and that is a very, very important element. The management has to have autonomy. That is critical. Uh, Joint ventures whose managements are dominated by either party have their hands tied and is a recipe for disaster. So a key element is to find out who will be those managers that are able to transition from one to other culture, from one need to the other, but to be truly independent. Joint ventures are great, but they're also difficult if they're not well planned, if there's no flexibility. But here in this issue of environment and specific industry that we're looking at, I think this is the one opportunity that we cannot dismiss. Joint ventures are a key element for success.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Appreciate it. Before we transition to our next speaker, Arno Neumann, who's going to talk about India and its waste management crisis and how it becomes an opportunity for India and also for small business to collaborate in these joint ventures that was talked about by Juan Carlos. I'd like to point out that there are different approaches. The approach in the joint venture that we believe in is that the joint venture entities form a corporate structure, public-private partnership structure, as delineated by David. And David did point out that he used a term that is called, where is it? Yeah, he calls it Technopolis. And David, before we just go on to Arno, why don't you just wrote down, and I'm not sure the viewers that asked the question, what is a Technopolis? Why don't you just read what you wrote?
Sure. A Technopolis is a vehicle that interactively links the public and private sectors together for technology innovation, commercialization at different levels, but particularly the regional levels, to spur economic development and to promote economic diversification within the regions. It's been a element that has brought innovation in many different regions around the world. If you look at places like here in my home city of Austin, Texas, the Technopolis concept is what has been cited as helping make us a technology innovator in this century.
Thank you, David, for that clarification, and I hope that answers the question of what I think of Jason.
Jason.
Yeah. So one of the issues that we want to talk about in today's session is a practical approach. So Sharif asked us, well, give us an example of a developing nation that you could go into and create opportunities in. And obviously, we look at each nation as has its own set of issues, its own set of cultural issues, as well as business issues and political issues. We need to deal with those, and we need to be able to form these public-private partnerships as an entity that together brings, as Juan Carlos pointed out, a management team that is blended. Just as Don Carly introduced to us in the last session the concept of blended finance for mobilizing climate finance, we need to have a blended management team that works together to solve the issues and kind of head off at the pass the issues that Juan Carlos experienced in his work over the past number of decades. So here's an approach to India's waste management crisis, and I hand it off to Arno Neumann, who is up early. He's in British Columbia, Canada, so he's up early. Even though he's next to the last on the panel, we want to give him a chance to articulate this. Go ahead, Arno.
Great. Thank you, Marshall, and thank you, Sharif, for inviting me to the panel and to the fellow panelists. Just wanted to say as a backdrop, before I get into the commentary on the slides, the word crisis. I find when I put information out, particularly on LinkedIn, the minute I put out a climate-related crisis, I find a number of people coming and challenging that because there's a certain disparity in terms of people believing that there's an issue. So anecdotally, just wanted to share, Marshall, you mentioned that I'm out in British Columbia. I'm actually about an hour east of Vancouver. And we've hit the global radar screen on the word crisis. This year, we had a new term several new terms come into our vocabulary. We had 2 periods of 1 week of over 40 degrees Celsius under what they call a heat dome. We've never had that. We have had the coldest in 100 years winter in this location. We're sort of the Mediterranean of Canada. We rarely have snow and cold. We've got it. We had a new phenomenon called atmospheric river, where we're known as the West Coast, but also the wet coast. So we get a lot of rain. We had in 2 days, approximately a month and a half's rain pour onto us. And we had an area of 25,000 acres of Canada's best fertile and productive agricultural land underwater. We had smoke coming from the fires in California up to our valley because it sort of funnels into us. So I just underscore the word crisis is real, and it's real for us here. What happens is coming into the slides is it's not until we measure things that we actually start looking at ourselves and changing our behavior. So if you get onto a weigh scale after, festive season, lots of, dinners and so forth, and you realize, wow, I've got a few more pounds, maybe I should change my behavior. So I have a basic belief that, all business is based on relationship. And in my community of 165,000, approximately 25% of our community is from India, and predominantly in the north from the Punjab area, because we have a lot of agriculture. That is the breadbasket of India. So we have a lot of people from India over here. My own business associate of over 25 years is from Mumbai. And so kind of had really an interest to do joint ventures in that part of the world, specifically in India. Now, if you look at the information here back to measuring, India has actually got the largest actual statistical solid waste management problem in the world, certainly because of its population size, and next door, basically in China, you've also got a very large statistical waste in China, but India actually tops the list. So basically, in terms of numbers, you've got at one statistic here, 62 million metric tons of solid waste management, and that is growing significantly, and it's going to be predicted to be about 165 million metric tons. Very, very significant number. In the next slide, which we'll get to in a minute or two, we can see what the volume is globally. The issue is that not all of it is dealt with. Only about 70% of it is collected and being able to either be processed or in forms of dealing. Often people just burn and bury it. We believe that there's better solutions than that. If you look at the 43 million metric tons, about 3/4 of it are put into landfills, and only about 1/4 is processed in some way or form. Landfills are very, very inefficient and inappropriate ways to deal with solid waste. Even in industrialized countries, when you look at landfills about 40, 50 years ago, to basically bury, or as we say, sweep under the carpet sort of thing, you just had a hole in the ground and you just put it in there and then you kept covering it up. What happens is that there's a processing, because there's moisture, there's organic, and there's other forms of waste. You have a huge generation of chemical mixing and leachate and methane production. And that can go into underground water, which is the drinking water source of many places. So the form of even using landfills is not the most sophisticated. More sophistication is if you put a geotech membrane in the bottom of the landfill and try to retain all the leachate, but it certainly is not a long-term solution. If you come back to India, in terms of the population being so large and growing, there's a move worldwide to urbanization. And with human beings, you have consumption, you have packaging, you have food inefficiencies and waste. So that accumulates. In India, the top two cities there represent, and the numbers are using lakh. So a lakh is 100,000. So if you look at Delhi, it's actually 3 million metric tons of solid waste per year. And Mumbai as well, about 25 million metric tons. Very, very, sorry, 2.5 million metric tons. Very, very significant from the urban populations. If we could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the global picture, there's about 11 billion metric tons of solid waste management collected. And when you look at trying to deal with climate change, greenhouse gases and so forth, there's different sectors. You've got buildings, you've got transportation, you've got power generation and so forth. In terms of production of greenhouse gases from solid waste management, that represents about 5%. So it's a very significant part of the climate change problem. The types of waste are organic. There's solid waste of recyclables, and then there's plastics, all kinds of things like that. Very often the systems are not efficient. Different countries deal with it by sorting and cycling and so forth. India has certainly got room for improvement in terms of that. Again, there's a heavy move to just dumping it, burying it. These landfills are not the solution. We can go to the next slide, please. So India's growth of solid waste is continuing. It's 4% approximately. Only about 15% of this waste is processed, and especially because there's a lot of urban centers, 60% of it comes from urban households. Mentioned that there's three core categories. If you look at the graph there, organic is the largest portion of the solid waste. So that could be composted. There are other ways of dealing with that. In terms of being able to look at agricultural organic waste, this is certainly where the pyrolysis biochar technology can be extremely effective. E-waste is growing. That has solutions, but they're very high, sophisticated technological to recover a lot of the rare earth minerals and so forth. And that is not very prominent in India at this time. One of the partners that we're looking at have been extremely interested in getting solutions for that. There's a few turnkey solutions out there, so that is better in terms of recycling and recovery, including in plastics, to be able to deal with that. What's concerning is that you have a lot of medical and hazardous waste that is growing significantly in terms of accumulation. Recycling is inefficient and ineffective at this point. It's an area of growth, but certainly, if we can go to the next slide, what are those solutions? So rather than burning things, burying things, or burning them, the huge problem in the Delhi area annually is after they harvest the rice, they basically burn the straw, and Delhi is known for its pollution during that period of time. It's not a solution. If that straw could be recovered and put into pyrolysis for biochar production, that would be a significant impact on that particular community. This would, create new opportunities in terms of jobs, as well as what kind of recoverable products that we can get from doing that. So as we've identified there, that in the previous graph, Mumbai and Delhi are the greatest producers of the solid waste management. That's where we're going to go and deal with recoverable waste. And we're actually dealing with local partners, back to this issue of businesses relationship. The people in India know where the resources are, have the logistical mechanisms, and know the labor force, and know the public policies that are inherent in terms of setting up management of solid waste. So that's a partner that we've identified. They're actually in the business of recycling steel from out-of-date ships. And so we're actually quite hopeful that we can make an impact because we've got a solid team to look at dealing with these categories of waste and this volume of waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arno. Stay on this slide for a second, Sharif. I just want to address a few things. At the bottom of the slide, there's a statement that the Climate Bond Initiative has special taxonomy for waste management. One of the things that we articulated in the Mobilizing Climate Finance webinar or panel the last time was that instead of the local partners bringing the capital, even the multilateral banks or their banking systems only need to act as guarantors, but they don't need to put up the cash, because the developing world will invest in this if it's done through a climate bond, an EU climate bond. And all 7 joint ventures that we've created so far are not in Europe, but it's a EU climate bond that will finance it. And that's because we meet some of the other requirements of the EU climate bond, and we have received a letter of fit for that. In order to do that, one needs to be able to not greenwash. In other words, you can't say one thing and do another. You need to quantitatively measure what you're doing and prove that what you're doing has results. And as Arnold pointed out, one of the big issues is the fact that a lot of the bonds that are out there, the green bonds, are not rated by Fitch or Morningstar. The climate bonds are. And the reason is because these are stringent rules of the road known as taxonomies. And the waste management taxonomy is a key element here in dealing with waste. And so I just wanted to talk about that, because what we're going to have is Mark is going to discuss the actual tools that we can apply to solving these problems at scale in the developing world and in cities such as Mumbai and around Southeast Asia, as well as in Africa and other developing nations, and also island nations. So, Mark, why don't you take the ball from here?
Thank you, Marshall. So if we can go to the next slide, Sharif. So one of the issues that for all of the opportunities that we see and all the problems that we're looking to resolve is to be able to handle and process the waste that is being produced, and to be able to extract the things that are causing the climate change damage that we're seeing globally, and particularly in the developing world. So one of the ways that we do that is we want to be able to revisit the usages of waste, and instead of seeing that as something that we need to dispose of, which has been historically what's been happening, and we've been burying it and putting it in landfills and burning it, is to be able to revisit that and reprocess that so that we can turn it into something useful. And the ways that we do this is that there are technologies that have been produced specifically to create what has been commonly known as biochar, but is not necessarily required to be made out of the organic materials such as woody biomass or from agricultural waste, but we can actually transform other forms of waste, including plastics, including things like railway ties, which we have large rail systems in the developing world. We have animal manure, there are textiles, and all of these things can be converted if they are properly treated in an oxygen-deprived environment so that we're not contributing to the global greenhouse gases, but actually of capturing them. And then we can actually restore those and make them into usable products that then over the long term extract some of the carbon out of the atmosphere. So we have the alpha 1, the alpha 2, and the alpha 3 systems. They're all basically using heat in the absence of oxygen to convert waste into different materials. The alpha 1 is our smallest system, and that kind of a technology can actually be deployed on smaller farms and placed into regions where there is not necessarily the infrastructure to support a larger scale system, or where there's not necessarily a waste management system, or in an urban area, such as what Arno was discussing in some of the larger cities in India, where you have large amounts, where you're collecting massive amounts of waste. So sometimes you want to be able to use a smaller system. There are systems that are even smaller than the alpha 1 that can be done individually. But for our purposes, because one of the things that we're looking to be able to accomplish is to make this production scalable so that it can actually provide the resources to then be put back into the world economy to be able to produce things that are quite usable. So we have the alpha 2 system, which can be has different capabilities. It uses rotary drum technology to be able to process the waste, and we can take different streams of waste and process them simultaneously. One of the advantages of the alpha 2 and the alpha 3 systems is the amount of volume of input that they can handle in each system. They can take up to 130 metric tons per day and then convert that into something in the neighborhood of 30 metric tons of usable char. So we can actually meet the demand that's now in use for that. And because the products that come out of that, depending on what the resources that are being brought into it, they can be done for, as I think was earlier spoken about, they can be done from everything from medical products, for health-related supplements, things like that. But they can also be used in building materials, in paints, in ways of extracting things out of the environment that have created problems. So one of the things that we have been able to do with the alpha systems is to produce a high carbon char that can then be used as a filtration medium. So we can actually do a secondary process where we begin to clean up the environment, and particularly in the water area. We can actually extract things like phosphorus out of water. We can extract heavy metals out of the water, so that we're cleaning that up so that we meet some of the demands for water. And that char, depending on what is being put into it, can then be converted into a product that goes into the soil. So one of the major ways that biochar is known globally today is as a soil amendment, where it's used to fertilize soil, reduce the amount of fertilizers that are being used, that are chemical fertilizers done out of the process of using fossil fuels to develop those. And they're not as advantageous for the soil, and they're certainly not as advantageous for the environment. And if we go to the next slide, our next technology that we use is a process where this technology, ultrafine nanobubbles, are bubbles that are probably 1,000th the size of the kind of bubbles that you might see in a carbonated beverage. What they are able to do is, due to the scientific function of the Brownian motion, they actually can stay in the water for up to 90 days. And they bring water, they bring the water, they oxygenate the water. And when water is oxygenated, it supports the life forms in the water so that they begin to do the natural process of taking the waste that's in the water, the detritus that's in the water, the things that are the leaves and things that are causing problems in the water, and actually begin to extract them. So we can use that in water treatment plants, we can use it in lakes, in rivers, and that supports the organic process of the water, turning those the waste that's in the water, the problems that are creating the water, and actually improve the quality of the water, so we can do that. One of the things that's become a large problem here has been the growth of algae and algal blooms, which can be harmful algal blooms and toxic algal blooms, and they consume the oxygen out of the water. Well, that reduces the opportunities for the fish and the plant life to grow in the water. So we want to be able to create that. If we go to the next slide. If we have taken the water, and we're taking water maybe from a water treatment plant, and we want to be able to clarify that water by using the char to do the first level of filtration. And with the second level of filtration is we add the oxygenated bubbles into the water to now revive the water and bring life back into the water. And that water can then be repurposed for things like irrigating crops. It can be used in livestock, but it's not necessarily potable for human consumption. So there is another product that we bring into the mix of what we do, which is called EnviroProtect, and it's an antimicrobial inhibitor. So what it does is it's a nanotechnology, so that it's not a poison, it's no kind of anything that's going to cause harm, but we inject that into sand filters, and those filters then begin to take out the microbial pathogens out of the water and clean it up and to actually make the water potable. And this, which has been EPA registered in the United States, has been tested for all these kinds of problems. And it uses a biostatic process where what it does is it actually mechanically kills the microbial life rather than using any kind of toxin or poison or chemical to do that. And because the product itself is water-based, it doesn't enter into the water. It actually adheres to the surface of the sand, and then is able to use to extract the toxins out of the water. And if we go to the next slide. This is an example here. That's a pictorial example of an algae bloom. This is in China. This was an example of what happened before the treatment using the nanobubble generator. And 2 weeks after the treatment had begun, you can see that the water is considerably cleaner. This is not necessarily the full cleansing of the water, but it certainly makes a big difference when you have a lot of sewage that gets into water. You want to be able to have that organically consumed through the aquatic life. There are processes that use the various life forms in the water to actually use that, and it becomes food for them, providing that they have the necessary oxygen. So what we're doing here is we're bringing life back to the water and letting life take care of cleaning the water. The next slide. This sort of looks at what we overall are viewing in terms of our factors and how we're approaching this. One of the things that we're looking at doing with these 4 different technologies that we use is that we want to be able to deliver on the triple bottom line. So we want to support people, and each of these installations is going to go into the local economy, where it's going to be able to address some of the environmental issues. It's going to be able to provide jobs. One of the things that we want to do is be able to support the education of people in the local economy, so that the fact that we're using this process to reconvert what was formerly waste that was something that needed to be paid for, that was a cost for the local community, now generates the process of offering the jobs, offering different kinds of economic benefits, as well as be it the things that we were talking about before about increasing the environmental restoration and remediation of the environment. So if we sequester the carbon, if we can restore the soils, if we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases, if we can do this in the local economy, in the local area, we actually create a much greater benefit for them. So we bring that idea into the people here, and we're providing these technologies. If we go to the next slide. So this really shows the ways in which the char can then be put into the water. So once we have the produced char, we have the filtration method. So we can use these kind of media filters where the char is placed in there, and then the water is run through that. It requires a small footprint, but the media actually receives will store the contaminants in there, and then that char that is then in that filter actually can now be reprocessed, what we call recharging the char, and now can be used. So depending on if we are extracting the things from fertilizers such as nitrogen and phosphorus, that can then be reblended with other composts and other materials to then become a usable soil amendment. If we're extracting things like pharmaceuticals, we can extract chemicals, we can extract heavy metals. Each of those can then be recharged and dedicated to the purposes for which they're best usable for. Another way that the char can be used is in the biofiltration, which is a little bit, it actually allows the water format to be put into these soil-based areas where you can actually begin to support plant growth, and you can reduce the amount of water that's being required, so it holds onto the water. And this is another possible solution that we can use, in the approach that we use. And each of these approaches will be determined by the local community. Go to the next slide there. So as I was saying about the nano bubble generators, the thing that we're seeing in this picture here is one of the Great Lakes, and some of the areas where you see the algal bloom that is now sucking the oxygen out of the water, and actually you're seeing dead zones. We see dead zones along the oceans. We see this where anywhere there's farm fisheries, where we're now farming for a lot of fish, for shrimp. And in those areas, we need to be able to oxygenate the water to keep that alive. And of course, the water now is one of the largest issues that we're facing globally, along with the melting of the glaciers and the rising sea levels, with the glaciers that are in places like in the mountains in India and the Himalayas, in South America, and the large mountains. We're seeing the glaciers are melting in Iceland and Greenland. All of these are contributing to the problems that we're seeing from global warming, and also the diminishment of water. So we need to be able to keep this resource, because water is the element that comprises 70% of the earth, but also comprises 70% of our own bodies. And so we need that water, and we need healthy, clean water. And one of the things that we can do with the technologies that I was discussing can actually help to clean water and make it more accessible. And finally, the last slide that we have here of this section here is discussing one of the things that results when you are processing waste is that part of that process is the production of what's called syngas, synthetic gas. And that gas has its own set of problems. And so a lot of the types of solutions that are being used now don't necessarily resolve this effectively. But one of the things that the ART solution has done is it's incorporating an ultra low emission engine called the Zajac engine. And what it is an engine that runs at a constant temperature. It emits constant torque and constant compression, because it burns the fuel at 1425 C. So the high temperature combustion that it uses, which is not typical of most current engines, allows it to completely burn any of the elements that are in it. So the actual exhaust that comes out of that is basically clean. There's no emissions or very, very low emissions, very low NOx, which is one of the problematic emissions that we have here in the atmosphere. And so we can actually convert that. And now we're creating energy in these systems. So the systems are now self-sustaining. So they're not taking energy from fossil fuels, but they're actually using the processing of the system to actually feed the energy. And if there's excess energy, then that energy can be brought into the local community. So if we are talking about a smaller establishment, we can use that energy to support the local community for charging, for lights. The other thing that comes off of this processing is there's heat, which in cold weather climates can be used for heating, could also be used and converted through technologies to use it for cooling, for preserving crops. So the whole idea of the four technologies that are being brought together for this process are there to support a circular economy, a circular system, so that it's all self-sufficient. And what it does is it brings something as a product back into the world, back into the local economy and the global economy to support both the cleaning of the environment, but also supporting the people who live in that area, as well as cleaning the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to make one comment, two comments actually. I noticed that Michael Rana has joined us. He's from a group known as, it's a group that he started, Industry 5.0. It's an important group. I suggest everybody support his group. But he asked a great question. He says, what's our approach? And I think Mark just articulated it very clearly. It's a triple bottom line approach where people are put first, especially everywhere in the world, but most importantly in developing countries where people have not always been put first. So he put people first, the environment second. So it's people, planet, and profit. Profit is there, and it can be done, and it's part of the mix. It's not just giving money away. People, we earn that money, but we put people first, and that's why we're able to meet the 14 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals currently, and we're working on more of those. And in the public-private partnership, we believe that we will ultimately meet all 17 of the sustainability goals, development goals put forth through the UN. And this is important because the sustainability development goals were created to answer or to give guidance to this climate crisis, whether you believe it's a crisis or not, it is. Time is of the essence. So we are there to help make this happen. We encourage everybody to do something similar and bring solutions to the table, such as we are doing. What we're doing now is we're reaching out through, and specifically we're reaching out through Sharif, through the World Talent Economic Forum, to developing countries around the world, whether it be in Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, or anywhere that developing countries need this opportunity. We will partner with you. We have the team to do it. We have the expanse to do it, and we can handle the volume. One of the things that the other point I wanted to mention, in which Mark presented, in one of his slides, he talked about the ultra nano bubble generator, and there was an ISO certification there. And the reason that was published there is because it's new. All the other technologies meet ISO certifications. We've been asked that before. And that's important because it's a standard. The ISO certifications are out there. There's the 9000 series, the 14,000 series, which addresses environmental issues, both in the manufacturing process of the equipment, but also in the usage of that equipment. So we do meet all those requirements. Interestingly enough, the ISO certification for the ultra nano bubble generator didn't exist until just recently. So that's why that was articulated. at this point, I think, Sharif, we hand it back to you for any questions that may have for our panel.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to give you thanks for a great presentation because you have an excellent team effort. I saw that everybody contributing. This is important for World Talent Economy Forum because we want to move as a team. Like all of the members, actually the team members, and we work as a team. But 2 points from my side, I believe that you can add or you can give the answer. Number one, like I'm also representing developing nations. So when you are discussing about circular economy, you are providing solution for sustainable development goals. Uh, Two things. Number one, uh, I believe that we need better policy. The country like India, country like Bangladesh, country like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, uh, they need better policy. Whatever we are discussing, we are creating awareness. But my question is that how we can develop better policy, because what I see that many public-private partnership initiative cannot move forward because of lack of policy. This is number one. Number two, I want to know, like, as practically I visited many even waste management, like in Chittagong, in even in India, in Malaysia, different projects. Personally, I visit a lot. Even before COVID, I visit many countries for developing this kind of projects. But my question is that when this kind of project comes, it's a big political decision. And second things, for example, for the waste management, there are many people has involved. So how your organizations uh, can take cares or train these peoples, as well as how you can develop a better ecosystem, because waste management is a big issue. And what you are offering, this is also an excellent idea. Undoubtedly, this is a good ecosystem. But how your organizations can help local ecosystem, that some point we observe that when large corporations go to any area in developing nation, they become afraid. They say, oh, we do not need the foreign companies. I'm just sharing the practical things, some of the cultural things. Maybe you understand. It's not I'm against you. I'm just giving you the practical. I know many large companies, they fail because they cannot motivate the local community, even the government with them. So, what is the strategy your organization has to adapt it this kind of challenging things? First, policy. Second, the local ecosystem and local people. How you want to handle?
So
Anyone can answer.
before we answer that, I would like to state a few recurring facts that showed up in this presentation today by this panel, and then I'll hand off to David and perchance Juan Carlos to address some of the policy issues and political issues that one deals with, because both have participated in that in countries other than the United States and Canada or Western Europe. One of the things that failed before, and it's understandable why there's fear by certain government officials. Government officials are not known to be early adopters of technology, and that is a fact. But our background is how to create adoption of innovations, whether the innovation is a technological innovation or a structural innovation or an approach to a problematic issue such as the adoption of a circular economy. Now, the good news on this adoption curve is that countries are already doing it successfully. So one of the ways we're doing it, and we're seeing competitors of ours, we call them competitors, but really we welcome them to do it. We know that a group like the Boston Consulting Group is promoting in Cameroon, a country that most people would never think of adopting this approach. Now, they're not doing exactly what we're doing, but that's okay. We want them to succeed, because if they succeed, then we succeed. And when I say success, meaning the adoption of this approach from a cultural, governmental, and political approach. And Cameroon has committed to creating 200 pyrolytic carbon capture and storage systems in the next number of years, over the next 10 years, I believe. So we know it's happening. And part of our approach is what is known as FOMO, FOMO, That's an acronym, and it stands for fear of missing out. No one wants to miss out on an opportunity that could make them politically stronger and could make their constituents vote for them again if they're in a democracy, or certainly give them the image or the ability, the practicality of bringing a solution to the problems that people are facing in the climate. So there are practical solutions. No one is going to claim that it's going to happen overnight. No one's snapping their fingers and saying, okay, tomorrow you have your solution. It takes time. However, time is of the essence. Why? Because we know scientifically, if you go into New York City itself, and Don is not far from there, he's in Manhattan right now, and he goes down to 14th Street, he can see what's called the climate clock. And the climate clock is counting down the hours, the minutes, till we get to a point of no return. And what is that point of no return? As Mark pointed out, the glaciers are melting. Why? Because of the increase of the temperature, of the global temperature that Don pointed out at the beginning of this presentation, the 1.5 degrees centigrade. We're at 1.2 and we're already melting. So what's going to happen when we get to 1.5 or 1.8 or 2.0?
We're going to need adaptation.
Yes.
The bottom line in all of this is the world is going to have an opportunity to decarbonize rapidly. We have to remove gigatons, hundreds of gigatons of carbon each year from the atmosphere, in addition to reducing the carbon in our fuels and sources of energy. If you think of how significant an opportunity industrialization was, decarbonization will be an even bigger opportunity and challenge for the world. So there's more than enough opportunity to go around.
Right. So
there
Don, I
need
want
to be,
I want to be able to hand off.
Sure.
Don is dealing with the practicality, in which everybody wants to hear the practical approach. So Don is bringing us the practical approach. However, we know that governments are not always dealing with practicality. They're dealing with theory. They're dealing with policy. Policy sometimes is theory, sometimes it's practical. So I think one of the answers is handled by David Smith's PPP approach. So David, why don't you speak to that?
I'd love to, Marshall. You know, part of what you see where governments struggle is governments really do a poor job in many instances of utilizing group intelligence and understanding the strengths of their stakeholders. In fact, many politicians, when I've sat down with them and said, let's map your stakeholders, they struggled and couldn't do it. And that is where you see some of the education that is necessary to make public-private partnerships work. That's where you see the education that is necessary to make even economic development projects work. Is we all know that one of the primary purposes of government is to protect the citizens and provide opportunities for citizens. But oftentimes that gets lost. And the pressures that are being put on particularly local governments and regional governments. But you have to understand that there's group intelligence. You have to understand there's different ways people look at the future and take those into account as you address them. I have an approach I use called a care about analysis. And what you do is you begin to look at the various stakeholders and what they care about and begin to work that into the strategy that you're doing with the government as you work on P3s. And that has been remarkably successful in helping craft agreements that everyone wins in. You know, that's the goal of a perfect one. And one last comment is, you know, I've talked about Technopolis. And one of the big interesting things on that is if you go back and look at where that really became from, it was actually back in the 1600s. And there was a writer designed a utopian city of science and technology. And it was a mythical place designed and governed by wise scientists where all citizens benefit equally from the technology. And I love the mythical parts there, but really where the concepts got refined is more in Asia, more in other parts of the world as they began. The whole concept of Silicon Valley was built from this group intelligence concept of beginning to pull the various stakeholders together as it has gone around the world and things. And we see it. Locally here, we had to have multiple governments, multiple academia, multiple companies come together for us to successfully bring Samsung's new $17 billion chip plant into our Central Texas region. And it was taking a Technopolis public-private partnership to get that done. Well, we're now in the running for a $20 billion Micron technology chip plant using the same type of approach, where it's using the group intelligence and putting together P3s to make this type of economic development work. And the same approach can be used to helping address the global challenges we have, like with the environment and with green.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Does anybody else on the panel have anything to add to this issue? Juan Carlos, you're muted.
Very briefly, I think in the developing nations, the crisis is right there, one block away from the powers, where the powers sit. I think this is not something that they have been able to handle, and the populace in general are exercising a pressure that they never exercise, because it is impacting their water systems, it's impacting the way they live every day, their breathing, it's impacting their ecology. So it's right out there. And that is programs like this one, I think, provide a comprehensive solution that will help to elaborate or contribute to policies that can be created and already exist, like the European approach that we are using in this particular case. So I think developing nations are perhaps more sensitive than we are in countries like in the United States, in Canada, because this is right on our faces.
And Arno, I think you mentioned the issue of in Mumbai and these other cities where they're burning rice hulls every day. So I think it supports what Juan Carlos is saying. Okay, so Sharif, I just want to issue one other. I noticed that Virginia from Brazil is asking a lot of different questions. We can't answer them all in this particular session, but she can reach out to us and we will provide answers to anyone and everyone out there. One of the things that we do believe this session has shown, as in the previous session, we showed how we can mobilize climate finance to work so that developing countries and their banking systems can act as the guarantors of their future, but they don't have to necessarily shell out the funds to solve the problem. The funds can come from the climate bond that we can obtain in the European Union that allows us to have institutional entities throughout the world pay for this. They want to pay for this because it helps balance their portfolios, but at the same time, it also gives them a return on their investment, as Don pointed out in the previous session on mobilizing climate finance. So the previous session and today's session are tied. You need the funds to be able to accomplish what we spoke about today and deliver the solutions that we have, that our group specifically has, but there are other groups out there that have other solutions, and we applaud them. We're not looking to prevent them from coming to the market. We want them to come to market because, as we said, if everybody worked together or just did their own thing, we could still not all of us cannot solve all the problems simultaneously together. It's an overwhelming threat on this crisis, but we need to take a step now, and we believe that we presented a practical approach to what we originally called the moment of truth. This is the moment of truth, folks. This is when we have to get serious about the climate crisis. Whether you believe one is happening or not, as Juan Carlos pointed out, it's right around the block from the powers that be in these developing countries. They're being faced with it. Their children, their grandchildren are going to breathe these atmospheres worldwide, not just in the European Union or the United States, but around the world. We need to act now, but we also need to be able to bring a economic benefit to the populations of these developing worlds, and also educate them as part of one of the sustainable development goals. And that's where Sharif's Economic Education Talent Forum plays a major role. We want to support that. We need these educational capabilities, and we need people locally to be able to step up to the plate together with us to solve these problems. So joint ventures for the developing world are important. We will bring other in this process, other panels in this process, these teams, and we will mention. And I noticed, by the way, I want to point this out, I'm transparent, that you notice that there are 7 of us on this panel, and we're all men. But we do have women, and we will bring those women to the table because we believe women need to play a major role in this process. We're very proud of the women that work in our team. Unfortunately, they're right now, we're unable to join this particular panel, but they will be in future panels. So thank you very much, Sharif, for having us. And if there are any other questions, we'll take them now.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Actually, I give you, everyone give chance to go for the concluding remarks. I just want to add some point. This is actually your visions and World Talent Economy Forum vision. We almost same. Around the world, everybody discuss about investment and technology. And many people forget about human resources. So that's why I started first 2 years before this talent economy, because we have to think about people. It's a people organizations. Always we are trying to focus on people development, people sustainability. Because if you do not have talent, you cannot run your corporation. Nobody gonna invest on you. Nobody gonna invest on these things. What is the power of developing nations? Developing nations has people. Let's say today you are discussing about India. India has a billions of people. So we always focus on investment and technology. Please do not forget about people. People is very important, and that's why we develop the talent economy. I just want to share some good news. We are not only developing this kind of dialogue, we are taking action. Like Mr. Marshall's, he can develop projects in developing world and solve this complex problem with his team. Beside that, World Talent Economy Forum, you can observe our School of Talent Economy. When this COVID comes, we find the major 2 challenges developing nations has. Number one, healthcare. Number 2, economy. So we in this present situation, because yes, we have limited ability. Our ability is not. We have a small ability, but with the support of some largest hospitals, we are creating job opportunity for the developing world, and we are providing training. Already, we are providing job opportunity for 1,050 people. It's very small compared to the need, very small, but I believe it will be helpful for the developing world. Just we finish the Rwanda like conference. After that, I believe that 31 people's already women, especially women, they get jobs in Europe through World Talent Economy Forum. So that is the things we are actually want to focus on economy, and any organizations want to solve problem of the developing nations. Definitely World Talent Economy Forum will support this initiative. And beside that, today we collaborate with Harvard Business School. Harvard Business Schools, they are very happy because they find that we are focusing on the people and people oriented activities, because for sustainability, people is very important. We need to care about people. That's why I always request Mr. Marshall and his team, we need to create awareness campaign. We need to develop university. We need to develop our people skills and knowledge. This is very important. And if you can develop a knowledgeable people, definitely, ultimately, all of your good things you can apply in the developing world. So thank you, Mr. Marshalls, and all of the great speakers for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with your corporation, with your academy. I know many of our audience actually share our contents from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from India, from Malaysia, Indonesia, who want to like take support from this kind of projects, or you want to create a joint venture. I'm sure Mr. Marshall and his team is open for developing these things. And again, my request: please focus on people. Please focus on the people values. So that's why I like Mr. Marshall approach: triple bottom line. First people, then product, finally profit. So this is important. This is sustainable business model. I request everyone to follow this kind of model. It will be helpful for us. Thank you everyone for your excellent presentations. Hopefully I will invite you all in our any classroom. Maybe in the classroom you will get more practical students. You can train them and you can share your views, and definitely your students will be politicians, will be corporate person, will be academic person from developing world. Thank you for joining today's session. Now I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. First, I request Mr. Marshall.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll go last. So I'll hand it off and we'll go round robin. So Don, you go first and then we'll go there. Concluding remarks.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. I'm left with the following observation that, yes, it's important that policy enable the implementation of action that results in impact. And there are frameworks that have been developed to guide policy innovation, especially in the developing world. The government of Malaysia has been working, I believe, with a number of world renowned consulting groups to develop those frameworks, and I'll encourage you to look at them. But let's just focus on one simple reality, that the equatorial regions of the world, the island nations of the world, have the benefit of incredible amounts of biomass waste. It is an opportunity to transform that waste into a climate benefit that will be an economic benefit to those countries. And if we couple that with transformation of the educational systems, we can begin to design for circularity. We can eliminate the notion of waste as a concept that is something to throw away, but rather waste is something to valorize, to create value with through the intelligent application of technology with informed policy in the developing world. So I leave you with that.
Thank you. Mr. Carlos.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think this issue of climate change, environment challenges has kind of equalized the balance between developing world and the developed world, in a sense that we all face a real common challenge in which solutions have to come from all angles and not just one part, and one part of the world has the answers and the other one has all the problems. Incredibly, we are all in the same boat. We all have the same challenges and we have the same expectations of success. So these kind of initiatives have tremendous impetus built in, because we all share this situation, whether we ignore it or we embrace it.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
My definition of technology is the application of knowledge to achieve a result. But we so often get hung up thinking that technology is a thing. It's really the application of knowledge to achieve a result. And as we look globally, we see the difference. East Asia, the Pacific Rim there, accounts for about 24% of the greenhouse gas. And, we can begin to work within a region to address that. But what's really necessary is for us to act globally across all the ecosystems to address this grand challenge. Um, we're at a time where we're moving rapidly to where action is the only item that can begin to affect us here. You know, I recently heard Elon Musk here in Austin talk about one of the reasons he's pushing so hard for us to become multi-planetary, multi-planet, is because he's not sure that we can address the greenhouse issues. He's not sure we can do it, and he wants a place where humanity can survive on Mars. I believe we can use our own group intelligence and begin to address these issues head on. And hopefully, we can use these concepts to move forward and solve these grand challenges. So, Sharif, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Uh, Mr. Mark Sabin.
Well, thank you, Sharif, and just to echo what you were talking about, this is all a matter of people. It requires a great amount of talent. It requires the people who have the resources, such as the financial resources, to contribute their part of it, and it requires the people who are living in all the regions of the world to be able to actually implement all the things that we're talking about here today. So what we need to engage, as you were asking about policy questions, is that we need to engage the policy contributions of the people in leadership to now take the actions that need to be taken, what David was talking about. It is about taking action. We know that we have already in many places the technology, the kind of innovations that can actually turn this crisis around that we've been facing now and are now at a critical point in turning this around. And what that's going to require is the engagement of all the people at all the different levels to participate in bringing this solution. And not only will that enable us to be able to resolve and to mitigate the problems that we're facing, but it's also going to be a paradigm shift, I think, for the attitudes that we have globally, because what we have seen is that the developed world has largely seen the undeveloped world as a place to take from. And it's not about taking at this point, it's about being able to give. And what we need to be able to give is all the elements that are going to make this process change, so that what we see for people is that we see the value in the people of the world, wherever they live, in whatever kind of situation that they're facing. And that's part of what this mission is. It's about, although we talk a lot about climate restoration and climate repair in terms of our immediate mission of what the tools that we can apply, but what that is about supporting the life of the people and all of the components of the environment to make it possible, because we need the agriculture, we need the water, we need the air. All these things are what are going to support the lives of the people that we want to support. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Sabin. Mr. Arnold.
Right. Thank you. Just sort of thinking about when you look at the size of the problem, solid waste management, the volume and so forth, and when you look at some of the solutions, they're looking small compared to the size of the problem. But there's a phrase out there: "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." So basically, you have to start, you have to model, and then you have to scale. And that's applicable whether it's the developed or the developing world. And so we all want to, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. We want to start with that model and implement and create the momentum.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Sharif, for having us again on the World Talent Economic Forum. Again, I think a lot of my colleagues here on the forum have expressed salient issues in their presentation, but also in their concluding remarks have come to the conclusion, as I have, and as I'm sure our viewers have, that time is of the essence. We need to act now. And I ask all the people who are watching, whether they're ministers of government, whether they're bankers, whether they're technology enthusiasts, or whether they're people who have solutions, please, please, we need to engage. The engagement is through where the moment of truth is here now. And you can reach out to us through Sharif. We will engage in dialogue and make things happen. We can make it happen, and we need to make it happen now. So we're getting serious on the climate crisis. We hope you are too, who are watching. And again, let's act and act now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. We believe in that way that we have to act now. Now this world has so much of challenges, even from the around the world. I know even my family member also died for COVID. Many people died. Many people go for lost their job. Many people go for suicide. Uh, Many things happening which is not we cannot control actually. So what we can do, we can act now. What Mr. Marshall said, we can act together. It's not developed world, it's not a developing world. We have to act as a human. So World Talent Economy Forum, it's a people's organization. It's all about people's. Always we focus on people. It's not we do not think about color, race, or anything. Anybody can join, anybody can support, anybody needs support. We are open to support you. Thank you, Mr. Marshalls, Mr. Don, Mr. Carlos, Professor David Smith, Mr. Mark, and Mr. Arno for joining today's session. This is an excellent session for our youth community and for our developing world. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Peace.
Thank you.
Bye.